The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber stretched 30 meters high, carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight that had taken the Vegan artisans 3 centuries to perfect. As they slowly parted with a sound like distant thunder, Ambassador David Kane stepped into a space that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. The chamber was a perfect sphere, its walls lined with viewing platforms that rose in endless tiers toward a domed ceiling that showed the real-time positions of every star in the galaxy. Thousands of alien representatives filled those platforms, their forms ranging from the familiar humanoid shapes to beings of pure energy that flickered like captured lightning. The air itself hummed with translation devices working in hundreds of languages, creating a symphony of alien speech that would have driven most humans mad within minutes. Kane walked alone across the polished floor toward the central speaking platform, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Behind him, the doors sealed shut with a finality that suggested no one had ever left this chamber without the Council's permission. Every eye, sensor, and detection organ in the room focused on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. At the highest tier of the chamber sat the Supreme Arbiters, 5 beings who represented the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Their forms were barely visible through layers of protective energy fields, but their presence pressed down on the chamber like a physical weight. These were entities that had witnessed the birth and death of stars, who had decided the fate of entire species with casual votes. Human. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the chamber's acoustic systems with harmonics that made Kane's bones vibrate. You stand before the Galactic Council accused of the most serious crime possible under interstellar law. Kane raised his head, meeting the gaze of creatures that had ruled the galaxy since before Earth's sun had formed. His voice when he spoke was steady and clear. And what crime is that exactly? A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled delegates. The translation system struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in human language, creating a cacophony of alien laughter, surprise, and something that sounded disturbingly like hunger. Ignorance, spoke the Arbiter of Justice, a crystalline being whose form shifted through geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Your species has violated the neutrality accords, the non-interference pacts, and most seriously, the primitive species protection protocols. Kane's expression didn't change, but those watching carefully noticed his hands relax slightly at his sides. I see. And which specific actions constitute these violations? Your expansion beyond your home system without proper authorization, the Arbiter of War growled, its voice like grinding metal. Your establishment of colonies on 17 worlds that were already claimed by member species. Your refusal to submit to genetic modification for proper integration into galactic society. The chamber fell silent as the accusations hung in the air. Every delegate knew the punishment for such violations. Species that defied the Council's authority were subjected to what the euphemistic translation systems called corrective adjustment. In practice, this meant the complete restructuring of their civilization, usually involving the elimination of any traits the Council deemed problematic. Most seriously, the Arbiter of Cosmic Order continued, its presence causing reality itself to bend slightly around its platform. Your species has been conducting illegal research into technologies that threaten the stability of galactic civilization. Kane tilted his head slightly. Which technologies would those be? Quantum consciousness transfer, dimensional engineering, and most disturbing of all, your attempts to weaponize the fundamental forces that govern space-time itself. For the first time since entering the chamber, Kane smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Those are interesting accusations. Do you have evidence to support them? The Arbiter of Truth materialized a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images flashed by showing human research facilities, scientific data, and what appeared to be experimental weapons of devastating power. The assembled delegates murmured in their various languages as they recognized technologies that could reshape the galaxy. Overwhelming evidence, the Arbiter of Truth declared. Your scientists have been secretly developing capabilities that rival those of the founding species. This represents an existential threat to galactic stability. Kane studied the holographic evidence with the detached interest of someone reviewing a weather report. Interesting. And how exactly did you obtain this classified information from secure human research facilities? The question seemed to catch the arbiters off guard. The chamber's ambient noise died to absolute silence as delegates realized the implications of what had just been asked. The Council has the right to monitor all species within its sphere of influence, the Arbiter of Justice replied, but there was something defensive in its tone. Your sphere of influence, Kane repeated slowly. That's an interesting phrase. Tell me, when exactly did humanity agree to be monitored by the Council? All spacefaring species are automatically subject to Council authority, the Arbiter of War snapped. This has been galactic law for over 50,000 years. Kane nodded thoughtfully. And what happens to species that refuse to acknowledge this authority? The chamber erupted in alien sounds that the translation systems couldn't properly process. Some delegates seemed excited, others appeared nervous, and a few were emanating what could only be described as threat displays. They are brought into compliance, the Arbiter of Cosmic Order stated flatly. By whatever means necessary. I see, Kane said. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked deceptively simple. Then I suppose you should know that humanity formally rejects the Galactic Council's claimed authority over our species. The device in his hand began to glow with a soft blue light that somehow made the entire chamber's advanced technology seem primitive by comparison. Warning alarms began to sound throughout the station as sensors detected energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Human, the Arbiter of Justice said, its voice now carrying an unmistakable note of concern. What is that device? Kane's smile widened. This is what we call a quantum beacon. It's been broadcasting our entire conversation to every human ship, station, and colony in the galaxy. They now know that the Council has been spying on us, threatening us, and planning to force us into compliance with laws we never agreed to follow. The device pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber's displays came alive with new images. Human fleets moving into position around strategic systems, defense platforms coming online around Earth, and most disturbing of all, massive installations emerging from what had appeared to be empty space near key Council strongholds. You wanted to know about our illegal research, Kane continued conversationally. We've been preparing for this conversation for over 30 years, ever since we first detected your surveillance networks in our space. The Arbiter of War leaned forward, its presence causing the air to crackle with energy. You dare threaten the Council? Kane shook his head. Not threaten, educate. You see, there's something you've fundamentally misunderstood about humanity. We don't like bullies, and we especially don't like being told what to do by creatures who think might makes right. The chamber's emergency lighting began to flash as proximity alarms indicated incoming ships. Through the vast windows, the delegates could see sleek vessels of unknown design emerging from hyperspace around the Council station. The truth is, Kane said as chaos began to spread through the chamber, we've been waiting for you to make your move. Every threat, every demand, every act of espionage has been carefully documented. And now the galaxy gets to see exactly what kind of organization the Galactic Council really is. The quantum beacon in his hand pulsed one final time, before disintegrating into harmless particles. Kane straightened his jacket and looked up at the 5 arbiters with calm confidence. So, shall we discuss new terms of engagement? Or would you prefer to explain to your member species why you just declared war on a civilization that's been preparing for this moment since before most of your delegates were born? The chamber fell silent once more, but this time the silence carried a very different quality. For the first time in 50,000 years, someone had said no to the Galactic Council, and they had the power to make it stick. 3 hours before Ambassador Kane walked into the Council chamber, Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the research vessel Pioneer, watching as her crew made final preparations for what military historians would later call the most audacious bluff in galactic history. Around her ship, hidden in the quantum shadows between dimensions, floated a fleet that officially didn't exist. The vessels were sleek and angular, their hulls made from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They bore no identifying marks, no national symbols, nothing that would indicate their origin except for their distinctly human design philosophy. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering that pushed the boundaries of known physics, built in secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belts of uninhabited systems. Status report? Morgan requested, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. All ships report ready, her tactical officer replied. Quantum stealth systems are holding steady. The Council's sensors can't detect us as long as we maintain dimensional phase variance. Morgan nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the Council station in all its massive glory. The structure was over 200 kilometers long, a technological marvel that housed representatives from thousands of worlds. Its shields could withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets, and its defense systems were legendary throughout the galaxy. None of that mattered if you could strike from a dimension the defenders couldn't perceive. Dr. Patel, Morgan called to the ship's chief scientist. Are you certain about the quantum resonance calculations? Dr. Rajesh Patel looked up from his console, his face showing the strain of months spent perfecting technologies that existed at the very edge of theoretical possibility. As certain as we can be, Captain. The dimensional fold generators are operating within acceptable parameters. We can maintain this position for approximately 6 hours before quantum decay forces us back into normal space. 6 hours. More than enough time for Ambassador Kane to deliver humanity's message to the Council. The question was whether the Council would be smart enough to listen, or proud enough to start a war they couldn't win. Morgan had studied the intelligence reports extensively. The Galactic Council ruled through a combination of technological superiority and the implicit threat of overwhelming force. Their military doctrine relied on massive fleets of conventionally armed vessels, supported by energy shields and weapons that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia. They had never faced an enemy that could attack from outside normal space-time. Communication from the surface team, the communications officer announced. Agent Harrison reports that the surveillance networks are fully mapped. We have complete intelligence on their defensive protocols. Agent Jake Harrison had spent 2 years infiltrating the Council Station's support staff, working as a maintenance technician while secretly cataloging every security system, every defensive measure, every weakness in their supposedly impregnable fortress. It was patient, methodical work that had given humanity an unprecedented advantage. The Council believes in their own invincibility, Morgan murmured, watching as streams of data flowed across her screens. They've been the dominant power for so long that they've forgotten how to fight an actual war. Her executive officer, Commander Torres, reviewed the latest intelligence updates. Their military records show they haven't faced serious resistance in over 3,000 years. Most species surrender the moment they realize the Council is interested in them. But not us, Morgan said with quiet satisfaction. We've spent the last 30 years preparing for this moment. The preparation had begun the day humanity's first deep space probe detected artificial signals from the galactic core. Instead of rushing to make contact, human leaders had made a decision that would prove crucial. They chose to observe and learn before revealing themselves. For 3 decades, humanity had remained hidden while secretly studying galactic civilization from the shadows. What they discovered had been deeply troubling. The Galactic Council wasn't the benevolent federation of worlds that many humans had hoped to find. It was an empire built on the systematic suppression of any species that showed signs of independent development. Worlds that refused to submit were subjected to economic blockades, technological sabotage, or, in extreme cases, complete orbital bombardment. Captain, Dr. Patel called urgently. I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in the station's core systems. Someone is attempting to scan our dimensional signatures. Morgan felt her pulse quicken. Evasive protocols. Shift us to phase variant 7. The Pioneer and its escort fleet flickered briefly as their quantum drives adjusted their dimensional position. To observers in normal space, they had never been there at all. But the attempt to detect them was concerning. It suggested that the Council's technology was more advanced than human intelligence had indicated. Contact from Ambassador Kane, the communications officer reported. He's entering the Council chamber now. Morgan activated the main viewer, which showed a quantum-encrypted feed from Kane's hidden camera. The massive chamber was even more impressive than their intelligence reports had suggested. Thousands of alien delegates filled the tiered platforms, representing civilizations that spanned the galaxy. The sight should have been inspiring, a testament to the possibility of galactic cooperation. Instead, it looked like a courtroom designed to intimidate defendants into submission. Look at them, Commander Torres observed quietly. They expect him to grovel. They're about to be very disappointed, Morgan replied. As they watched, Kane began his performance. Every word had been carefully scripted, every gesture calculated to achieve maximum psychological impact. The ambassador wasn't just delivering humanity's rejection of Council authority. He was demonstrating that humans had done their homework. Quantum beacon is active, Dr. Patel reported. The signal is broadcasting on all frequencies, both subspace and hyperwave. Every human installation in the galaxy is receiving Kane's transmission. That was the key to their strategy. The Council expected to deal with a primitive species that could be intimidated into compliance. Instead, they were facing a civilization that had spent decades preparing for this exact confrontation. Every human colony, every research station, every merchant vessel was now receiving real-time intelligence about the Council's true nature. Defense platforms are powering up, the tactical officer announced. All ships report weapons systems online. Morgan watched as warning lights began flashing throughout the Council station. The massive structure's defensive systems were responding to threats they couldn't identify, creating exactly the kind of confusion humanity needed. The Council's sensors could detect the energy signatures of weapons charging, but they couldn't locate the sources. Phase 3, Morgan ordered. Throughout the chamber, carefully placed holographic projectors activated, displaying images that made the assembled delegates recoil in shock. Human research facilities that should have been secret, scientific breakthroughs that represented decades of hidden development. Most disturbing of all, the locations of Council surveillance outposts that had been operating in human space for years. "They've been watching us," Commander Torres said, studying the intelligence data, spy satellites, monitoring stations, even infiltration teams on Earth itself. "And now everyone knows it," Morgan replied with grim satisfaction. The Council just lost the moral high ground. The revelation was spreading throughout the chamber like wildfire. Delegates who had believed they were part of a legitimate governing body were discovering that they served an organization that conducted illegal surveillance and planned preemptive attacks against peaceful species. The political implications were staggering. "Captain," the communications officer called urgently, "we're receiving multiple transmissions from Council member species. They're requesting independent confirmation of the intelligence data." Morgan smiled coldly. "Give it to them. Full disclosure, complete files. Everything we've gathered over the past 30 years. The decision to release their intelligence archives would fundamentally change galactic politics. For the first time in millennia, member species would have access to the Council's secret files, their classified assessments, their private discussions about problematic civilizations. The trust that held the galactic government together was about to evaporate. "Multiple ships are moving toward the station," the tactical officer reported. "Council security forces are responding to our presence." "Let them come," Morgan replied. "They can't fight what they can't see." The Council's response was entirely predictable. Massive warships emerged from hyperspace around the station, their weapons charged and shields raised. It was an impressive display of force that would have terrified any conventional enemy. Against an opponent operating from another dimension, it was completely useless. "Begin Phase 4, Morgan commanded. Across the galaxy, human installations that had been carefully hidden for decades suddenly revealed themselves. Research stations emerged from asteroid fields where they had been camouflaged for years. Admiral Corrin had commanded the Council's 3rd Sector fleet for over 4 centuries, and in all that time, he had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of overwhelming firepower. As he stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the impossible structure unfold above the galactic core, he felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, her voice trembling despite her military training, "the unknown structure is approximately the size of a small moon. Energy readings are off the scale. Our sensors can't even classify the weapon systems it's deploying." Corrin studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human structure wasn't just large. It was actively reshaping space-time around itself, creating gravitational anomalies that suggested technology far beyond anything in the Council's arsenal. Worse, it had appeared without any warning from their long-range detection systems. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence reports indicated that humans barely achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago." "Sir, we're receiving new intelligence updates from Command," the communications officer announced. "Apparently human civilization is significantly older and more advanced than our original assessments indicated." The updated files that flashed across Corrin's screens painted a disturbing picture. Humans hadn't stumbled into space travel recently. They had been secretly exploring the galaxy for over 3 centuries. carefully avoiding detection while studying every major civilization. Their apparent primitiveness had been an elaborate deception designed to prevent exactly the kind of preemptive strike the Council was now attempting. They've been watching us, Corin realized with growing horror. All this time, they've been learning our capabilities, our weaknesses, our military doctrine. It gets worse, sir, his intelligence officer added grimly. The structures appearing throughout our territory aren't new constructions. Deep analysis suggests they've been in position for decades, hidden by some kind of dimensional cloaking technology. Corin felt his confidence crumbling as the true scope of humanity's deception became clear. Every strategic assumption the Council had made was wrong. Every tactical advantage they believed they possessed was based on fighting enemies who operated within the same technological framework. Humans had been playing by entirely different rules. Orders from the Supreme Council, the communications officer announced. All fleets are to converge on human positions and demonstrate overwhelming force. The humans must be made to understand the consequences of defying Council authority. Corin nodded, though privately he wondered if overwhelming force would be sufficient against an enemy that could hide entire fleets in alternate dimensions. Signal all ships. Battle Formation Alpha. We'll show these humans what happens when they challenge the natural order. The Third Sector Fleet was one of the Council's most powerful military formations, consisting of over 300 warships equipped with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached. As they moved into attack formation, their combined firepower represented enough destructive capability to sterilize entire star systems. It should have been more than sufficient to handle a species that had supposedly achieved spaceflight less than a century ago, sir. We're detecting incoming transmission from the human formation, the communications officer reported. Audio only. No visual component. Put it through, Corin ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of the fear that Corin expected to hear from a commander facing impossible odds. Admiral Corin, this is Captain Elizabeth Wade of the Human Defense Force. I'm required to inform you that you are approaching a restricted military zone. Please alter course immediately to avoid unfortunate misunderstandings. Corin couldn't suppress a laugh. Human Captain, you are facing the combined might of 3 Council fleets. Surrender immediately, and your species will be granted the mercy of supervised integration into galactic civilization. Admiral, came the patient reply, I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation. This is your final warning. Withdraw your forces or accept the consequences of continued aggression. The sheer audacity of the demand left Corin speechless. A single human ship was threatening 3 of the Council's most powerful fleets as if the outcome was already decided. Either the humans were delusional, or they possessed capabilities that made the Council's intelligence estimates catastrophically inaccurate. All ships, open fire, Corin commanded. Show them the price of arrogance. The combined firepower of 300 warships erupted in a coordinated barrage that should have vaporized anything within a light second of the target zone. Energy beams that could pierce, planetary shields and projectiles that traveled at significant fractions of light speed converged on the human positions with devastating precision. The weapons never reached their targets, sir, the tactical officer reported in a voice that had gone completely flat with shock. Our weapons fire is being redirected by some kind of spatial distortion field. The energy is being absorbed into what appears to be artificial black holes. Corin watched in horror as the Council's most devastating weapons were casually neutralized by technology that shouldn't exist. The humans weren't just blocking their attacks. They were harvesting the energy for their own purposes. Impossible, he whispered. Nothing can manipulate space-time on that scale. Admiral, Captain Wade's voice returned, still maddeningly calm. Your demonstration is complete. Now please observe ours. The space around the human formation suddenly came alive with activity as dozens of structures materialized from dimensional fold space. They were sleek and predatory, bristling with weapon systems that operated on principles Corin couldn't begin to understand. More disturbing still, they moved with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't entirely mechanical. Sir, those aren't ships, his science officer announced with barely controlled panic. They're some kind of hybrid technology. Part machine, part living organism, part something else entirely. Corin didn't have time to process the implications before the human counterattack began. It wasn't the massive energy barrage he expected. Instead, The hybrid vessels released what appeared to be small spheres that moved with impossible acceleration toward the Council fleet. "Evasive maneuvers," Corrin ordered, but he knew it was already too late. The spheres struck the Council ships with surgical precision, penetrating shields as if they didn't exist. But instead of explosions, something far more terrifying occurred. The spheres began to restructure the ships they touched, converting advanced Council technology into something unrecognizable. "The Vengeance is reporting complete system failure," the communications officer announced. "All technology aboard the ship is being converted to unknown configurations. The crew is unharmed but trapped aboard a vessel they no longer recognize." Similar reports flooded in from across the fleet. Ship after ship fell victim to the mysterious spheres, their crews helpless as their vessels were transformed into something alien. The Council's most advanced warships were being turned into museum pieces before their eyes. "What do they want?" Corrin demanded, watching his fleet dissolve around him. "Admiral," Captain Wade's voice answered his unspoken question. "We want you to understand that this conflict can end one of two ways. Either the Council acknowledges humanity's right to exist as an independent civilization, or we continue demonstrating why your current approach is unworkable." Corrin looked around his bridge, noting that his own ship's systems were beginning to flicker as more of the mysterious spheres approached. "You're converting our ships but not harming our crews." "Why?" "Because we're not monsters, Admiral. We could have destroyed your fleets entirely, but we prefer to make our point without unnecessary casualties. Consider this an educational demonstration rather than an act of war." The Admiral felt his worldview crumbling as he realized the true implications of what he was witnessing. The humans hadn't just hidden their technological capabilities. They had developed weapon systems that could neutralize the Council's military advantage without committing genocide. They possessed the power to destroy galactic civilization but chose restraint instead. "Sir," his tactical officer reported quietly, "all ships report the same phenomenon. Their vessels are being converted but their crews are unharmed. The humans are essentially giving us a practical demonstration of their capabilities without actually killing anyone." Corrin closed his eyes as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The humans hadn't revealed themselves because they were ready for war. They had revealed themselves because the Council's actions had finally crossed a line they couldn't ignore. This wasn't conquest. It was correction. "Captain Wade," he said finally, "what exactly do your people want from us?" "Admiral, we want what every intelligent species should want. The right to exist without interference from those who consider themselves our betters. We want the Council to acknowledge that galactic civilization is large enough for more than one approach to progress." K. Supreme Arbiter Vexthane had ruled the Galactic Council for over 8,000 years, witnessing the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations during her impossibly long tenure. In all that time, she had never called an emergency session at the Council's deepest secure facility, a fortress buried in the core of a dead star where reality itself was reinforced against external interference. Today, that perfect record was broken. "Report," she commanded as the surviving members of the inner circle materialized around the crystalline conference table. The gathering was smaller than usual. 3 arbiters had suffered what the medical staff politely termed cognitive displacement syndrome after witnessing humanity's technological demonstrations. Their minds simply couldn't process the implications of what they had seen. Arbiter Zelkroth, the Council's chief military strategist, activated a holographic display that showed the current state of galactic defenses. What it revealed was devastating. 47% of our military assets have been neutralized or compromised. The humans haven't destroyed them. They've converted them into something else entirely. Our crews are unharmed but essentially prisoners aboard ships they no longer understand. "How is this possible?" demanded Arbiter Morden, her biomechanical form crackling with frustrated energy. "Our intelligence indicated that humans were barely past the initial stages of space exploration." "Our intelligence was deliberately deceived," Zelkroth replied grimly. "Analysis of the human technological demonstrations indicates a civilization that has been studying galactic affairs for at least 3 centuries. They've been observing us, learning our capabilities and preparing countermeasures for every aspect of our military doctrine." Vexthane felt a cold dread settling in her ancient consciousness. "Show me the technological analysis." The holographic display shifted to reveal schematics of human weapon systems that operated on principles that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic science. Dimensional manipulation technology that could fold space-time like origami. Energy conversion systems that transformed hostile fire into usable power. Most disturbing of all, hybrid biomechanical constructs that seem to exist partially outside normal reality. They're not just advanced, the chief science advisor reported with barely controlled panic. They're operating according to completely different physical laws. Their technology suggests an understanding of quantum mechanics that surpasses our greatest theoretical physicists. That's impossible, Arbiter Morden insisted. No species develop such capabilities without being detected by our monitoring systems. Unless they specifically develop those capabilities to avoid detection, Vexthane realized with growing horror. Show me the political analysis. The display changed again, revealing something even more threatening than human military might. The complete collapse of Council political unity. Member species that had loyally supported the galactic government for millennia were now demanding explanations for decades of secret surveillance and preemptive military planning. The humans released our classified files to every member species. Simultaneously, the political advisor reported, they have documentation of every covert operation, every surveillance program, every contingency plan for dealing with problematic civilizations. Our member species are discovering that we've been treating them as potential threats, rather than valued allies. Vexthane closed her eyes as the true scope of humanity's strategy became clear. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was a surgical dismantling of the political structure that held galactic civilization together. The humans had studied the Council's weaknesses and exploited them with devastating precision. Sir, an aide interrupted urgently. We're receiving a transmission from the human leadership. They're requesting a private conference. Requesting? Arbiter Zelkroth snarled. They've crippled our fleets and destabilized our government, and now they're making requests? Vexthane raised a hand for silence. Throughout her long reign, she had survived by recognizing when circumstances required adaptation rather than confrontation. Accept the transmission. Let's see what they want. The holographic display dissolved and reformed into the image of a middle-aged human woman wearing simple civilian clothes. She appeared completely calm, as if she were discussing routine trade negotiations rather than the potential end of galactic civilization. Supreme Arbiter Vexthane, the woman said with polite respect. I'm Dr. Amanda Chen, Secretary General of the Human Colonial Administration. Thank you for agreeing to this conversation. Dr. Chen, Vexthane replied carefully, your species has just committed acts of war against the lawful government of the galaxy. I assume you have some explanation for this aggression? Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that suggested depths of knowledge the Council hadn't suspected. Supreme Arbiter, with respect, we've committed acts of self-defense against an organization that was planning to forcibly integrate our civilization into your empire. Our actions were entirely reactive. Your colonies were established in systems already claimed by Council member species, Arbiter Morden interjected. Your expansion violated established territorial boundaries. Those systems were uninhabited, Dr. Chen replied calmly. We established colonies only in locations where we detected no intelligent life and no evidence of prior habitation. If the Council considers empty space to be the property of specific species, that's a philosophical difference we're prepared to discuss diplomatically. Vexthane studied the human leader carefully. There was something profoundly unsettling about Dr. Chen's composure. Most species, when facing the combined might of the Galactic Council, either groveled for mercy or raged against their inevitable fate. The human showed neither fear nor anger, only patient professionalism. Dr. Chen, Vexthane said slowly, your species has demonstrated capabilities that our best scientists claim should be impossible. How do you explain this discrepancy? Different approach to scientific development, Dr. Chen replied with a slight smile. The Council appears to focus on refining existing technologies to achieve incremental improvements. Humans prefer to question fundamental assumptions and explore alternative possibilities. The implications of that statement sent chills through the assembled arbiters. The Council's technological supremacy was based on 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge and gradual improvement. If humans could achieve superior results by simply thinking differently about the underlying principles, It suggested that the Council's entire approach to progress was fundamentally flawed. "What do you want from us?" Vexthane asked directly. "Recognition of humanity's right to exist as an independent civilization," Dr. Chen replied immediately. "Formal acknowledgement that galactic space is large enough for multiple approaches to societal organization. Most importantly, we want the Council to stop treating every new spacefaring species as a potential threat that must be controlled or eliminated." Arbiter Zelkroth leaned forward aggressively. "The Council maintains order throughout the galaxy. Without central authority, civilization would fragment into chaos and warfare." "The Council maintains control," Dr. Chen corrected gently. "That's not the same thing as order. True stability comes from voluntary cooperation between equals, not from forced submission to a superior power." "And if we refuse your demands?" Vexthane asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Chen's expression remained calm, but her next words carried an unmistakable finality. "Then we'll be forced to demonstrate why voluntary cooperation is preferable to continued conflict. Supreme Arbiter, we've shown you a small sample of our defensive capabilities. Our offensive technologies are significantly more impressive." The holographic display suddenly activated without any input from the Council's systems, showing images that made the assembled arbiters recoil in shock. Massive structures hidden throughout the galaxy, weapon systems that could destabilize entire star clusters, and most terrifying of all, evidence that humans had been secretly in contact with dozens of other civilizations that the Council believed were under their complete control. "You're not facing a single rebellious species," Dr. Chen continued as the images played. "You're facing a coalition of civilizations that have been waiting for someone with the capability to challenge Council dominance. We didn't start this conflict, Supreme Arbiter, but we're prepared to finish it." Vexthane felt the weight of 8,000 years of absolute power crumbling around her as she realized the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't a local rebellion that could be crushed with sufficient force. This was a fundamental challenge to the entire concept of Council supremacy, backed by technologies that made their most advanced weapons look like primitive tools. "What are your terms?" she asked quietly. "Complete restructuring of galactic governance," Dr. Chen replied without hesitation. "The Council can continue to exist as a coordinating body for voluntary members, but the age of imposed authority is over." 71 hours after Dr. Chen's ultimatum, Supreme Arbiter Vexthane stood alone in the Council's ancient meditation chamber, surrounded by crystalline formations that had recorded the thoughts and decisions of galactic leaders for over 40,000 years. The weight of those accumulated millennia pressed down upon her as she contemplated a choice that would reshape the very nature of civilization. Behind her, the great crystal archives pulsed with soft light as they processed the flood of information that had arrived throughout the previous 3 days. Reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of irreversible change. Member species were declaring independence from Council authority. Long-suppressed civilizations were emerging from hiding with technologies that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic development. Most significantly, the human coalition was demonstrating capabilities that made the Council's military superiority completely irrelevant. Supreme Arbiter, Arbiter Zelkroth, entered the chamber, his massive form moving with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The final intelligence reports have arrived. The situation is unprecedented." Vexthane didn't turn around. "Show me." The chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays that revealed the true scope of humanity's preparations. Hidden installations throughout the galaxy were revealing themselves, each one representing decades of patient construction and careful concealment. Worse still, the installations weren't purely human. They had been built in cooperation with dozens of species that the Council had believed were completely under their control. The humans weren't working alone, Zelkroth reported grimly. They've been secretly coordinating with over 200 different civilizations, including some of our oldest and most trusted member species. This coalition has been developing alternative technologies and governance structures for over a century. Vexthane finally turned, her ancient features showing the strain of 3 days without rest. "How many of our member species have formally requested withdrawal from Council authority?" "As of this morning, over 60%, Zelkroth replied. "The number is increasing hourly. It appears that many civilizations were only remaining loyal out of fear, rather than genuine commitment to our principles." The revelation was devastating but not entirely surprising. The Council had maintained order through the implicit threat of overwhelming force for so long that they had forgotten how to inspire genuine loyalty. When that force proved ineffective against human technology, the entire foundation of their authority collapsed. "What about our military capabilities?" Vexthane asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Effectively neutralized," Zelkroth admitted. "The humans continue to convert our ships rather than destroy them, but the result is the same. Our crews are unharmed but completely dependent on human goodwill for their safety. More disturbing still, some of our commanders are reporting that the converted ships actually perform better than the originals." Vexthane closed her eyes as she processed the implications. The humans weren't just defeating the Council's military, they were improving it. Their technology was so advanced that they could casually upgrade the galaxy's most sophisticated warships as a side effect of neutralizing them. "There's something else," Zelkroth continued reluctantly. "We've received detailed proposals from the Human Coalition outlining their vision for galactic governance. The documents are remarkably sophisticated." "Show me." The holographic displays shifted to reveal constitutional frameworks, economic models, and diplomatic protocols that addressed problems the Council had struggled with for millennia. The human proposals weren't the crude demands of conquering barbarians. They were carefully crafted solutions developed by civilizations that had studied galactic affairs with scholarly precision. They've been preparing for this transition for decades, Vexthane realized. This wasn't a spontaneous rebellion. It was a carefully orchestrated evolution. "Supreme Arbiter," another voice interrupted from the chamber entrance. Arbiter Morden approached with obvious reluctance, carrying a sealed communication device. "We've received a final message from Dr. Chen. She's requesting your personal decision within the next hour." Vexthane accepted the device and activated it. Dr. Chen's image appeared, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives from dozens of species, creating a tableau that represented the future of galactic civilization, whether the Council participated or not. "Supreme Arbiter," Dr. Chen began with the same calm professionalism that had characterized all her communications. "I hope you've had sufficient time to review our proposals. Before you make your final decision, there's something you should understand about humanity's ultimate objectives." The image shifted to show a massive space station under construction near the galactic core, its design incorporating architectural elements from hundreds of different civilizations. It was clearly intended as a meeting place for the new galactic order, a symbol of cooperation rather than domination. "We're not seeking to replace the Council's authority with our own," Dr. Chen continued. "Human civilization has no desire to rule the galaxy. We're interested in facilitating voluntary cooperation between independent civilizations. Your experience and wisdom would be invaluable in making this transition successful." Vexthane felt something she hadn't experienced in millennia: hope. The humans weren't offering conquest disguised as liberation. They were proposing genuine partnership between equals. Their technology gave them the power to impose their will, but they were choosing cooperation instead. However, Dr. Chen's tone became more serious. "If the Council insists on maintaining the old system of imposed authority, we'll have no choice but to proceed without you. The age of forced compliance is ending whether you participate in building its replacement or not." The transmission concluded with a final image that made Vexthane's decision inevitable. Hundreds of civilizations throughout the galaxy were already implementing the new governmental frameworks, creating a network of cooperation that spanned thousands of worlds. The Council could join this emerging order as partners, or they could be left behind as irrelevant relics of a discredited system. "Arbiter Zelkroth," Vexthane said quietly, "summon the full Council. It's time to vote." 2 hours later, the Council chamber hosted its final session under the old system of absolute authority. The assembled delegates represented thousands of worlds and dozens of species, but their power was already historical rather than practical. The real decisions about galactic civilization were being made elsewhere by civilizations that had chosen cooperation over coercion. "Fellow arbiters," Vexthane addressed the gathering with the weight of 40,000 years of history behind her words. "We face a choice that will determine not only our survival, but our relevance in the emerging galactic order. We can cling to the illusion of absolute authority and become irrelevant, or we can embrace change and help build something better." The debate that followed was brief but intense. Some arbiters argued for continued resistance, believing that human superiority was temporary and could be overcome with sufficient effort. Others recognized that the old system had already collapsed and that adaptation was the only viable option. When the final vote was called, the result was decisive. The Council would formally dissolve its claim to absolute authority and request membership in the emerging Confederation of Free Worlds as an equal partner rather than a dominant power. The announcement was transmitted throughout the galaxy within minutes, marking the official end of an era that had lasted longer than most civilizations had existed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of worlds that had remained neutral suddenly declared their intention to join the new galactic order. 6 months later, Ambassador David Kane stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching as representatives from over 1,000 different civilizations worked together to establish the frameworks for a new kind of galactic civilization. The massive structure was still under construction, but it already housed the largest diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Any regrets? Dr. Chen asked, joining him at the viewing port. Kane considered the question carefully as he watched former Council warships working alongside human vessels to establish trade routes and communication networks throughout the galaxy. The conversion technology that had neutralized the Council's military had been refined into tools for peaceful cooperation, turning weapons of war into instruments of progress. About the methods we used? No, Kane replied finally. We demonstrated that forced compliance was no longer viable, but we did it with minimal casualties and maximum benefit for everyone involved. About the results? He gestured toward the bustling activity throughout the station. Look around. This is what galactic civilization should have been from the beginning. Through the viewing port, they could see delegations from species that had hidden from the Council for millennia, now participating openly in galactic affairs. Former enemies worked together on scientific projects that would have been impossible under the old system of restricted technology sharing. Most remarkably, the rate of innovation had increased exponentially as civilizations shared knowledge freely.